10.5 months. The normal tour of duty in Vietnam when I was there, when I was going through the service, was a year. You went for 1 year usually, unless you were injured or killed, and then you rotated back. And occasionally, depending on what your obligation was to the service, you might be sent back for a second tour, or you could volunteer. I didn't do either.
Okay. So during your time in Vietnam, did you have a feeling of national pride, or was there a sense of fear, or was it both?
That's a good question, and the answer is a little bit startling, Sam. Um, I was really not very different than most of the 1.5 million people that served there. I was scared out of my mind. Combat and the thought of even going to combat was very terminal. Terminal meaning I can't tell who the enemy is, so I don't know who to shoot. But I do know that they know who I am because I have this uniform on. A feeling of patriotism and national pride, absolutely not. Now, most people would say, well, that's because it was Vietnam. But the truth of the matter is, well, you may, let's say, in the past and now presently, because of an all-volunteer army, you may have a sense of obligation and patriotic pride to join the service, but truthfully, when you set foot on the battlefield and your life is in danger, you're worried about yourself and the guy on the right of you and the guy on the left of you, and that's all. You're not, as brutal as it sounds, you're not killing people for the United States of America. You're killing them because you're afraid and you've been trained to kill them and you're trying to protect your buddies. In my case, I was a leader. I was a platoon leader, so I had 33 men that I was responsible for. And as you probably saw in the book, once the first two times I should have been killed was only in the first week, 2 weeks. And I was, almost comatose. I was so scared. But on the second round, when I should have been shot out of the sky and all this other stuff, I came back and I had made it, and I was shaken, and I was suddenly proud of myself that I had overcome some fear. But that became very secondary to then that the shock of that, Sam, was a very good thing, and that was that I realized my job is to protect my men. It's not to protect myself. It's not to save my life. If it is, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to get somebody hurt. I need to pay attention to the people I'm leading. And from there on, that's all I concentrated on.
Right. Awesome. So, what was different about your life when you returned from the war compared to your life beforehand?
Night and day. I was, I was born and raised in San Francisco, which is was at the time the epicenter of the hippie revolution. I went to high school and college right in the Haight-Ashbury district. I graduated in 1968 from college, so I saw the whole hippie thing start and the whole cultural revolution start. And I chose, as a student and as a citizen of the city, I chose not to get caught up in it. And then I had to go into service, and when I came back, the civilian life that I knew and the immaturity that I thought was maturity at age 22 or 23 turned out to be completely worthless because the culture had changed so radically in the United States. Almost nothing seemed familiar. And I was, as were most of us that fought in Vietnam, I was ashamed. I was rejected. Um, I felt myself feeling very betrayed by the country and by my peer group, um, actually by my family also. Not because they did anything, but because people were so embittered as a country about the war itself, with very little accurate fact, that the soldier became the focal point of their bitterness and their anger and their resentment and their resistance. Now, it's important to understand I'm saying they had no accurate information. So they were reacting to whatever was being fed to them, whether it be by the resistance or whether it be by the administration. So when I came home, I was very quiet, and I was very standoffish, and I did not really connect with anybody. And I didn't want to connect with anybody because I was afraid I was going to be emotionally hurt. You know, because I had been spit on, I had had paint thrown on me and all that. So the better thing for me in my mind was, okay, this isn't the place I left, and that's fairly loose because you have an impression that is all candied up, so to speak, you know. And when you come back, you think, oh, I can go right back. No, well, it's not the same. It wasn't the same. But in your head, you felt, you know, I need something familiar. When I came back, there was nothing familiar. There was nothing to connect to. And so I, like many of us, felt I have to take care of myself. I can't depend on anybody else.
Yeah, so how were you able to return your normal self and overcome all those other people?
The answer to your first question is I never did become my normal self. I was sick for a long time. But on the surface, Sam, I returned to what appeared to everybody else to be a normal life. You know, big success in a big company, lots of money, perfect kids, live in a nice white bread community like Lake Forest, you know, have all the cars you want, have all the money you want, and all that kind of stuff. And that was my driving model in my head that said, that's where happiness is. That's where I'm going to find an escape from this. But inside, there was a big hole in me that came from the losses I saw and the combat I had. But you know, your defense mechanisms and your coping skills aren't professional. They're what you have and what I have. And the coping skill that seemed to work for me was work as hard and as best as you can and concentrate on that. So I did. And that's what also made me very successful in the civilian world.
Yeah. So you're the author of the book Last Mission for a Reluctant Patriot. So what made you want to share your story?
That's another very good question. Because I had not, because I didn't come home normal, the abnormalcy came out of me when I retired. At the age of about 55, I started having all recall back to the time that I was in Vietnam. And at the onset of that, again, my coping mechanisms were whatever I thought. I just was wondering, why is this happening now? I mean, I've forgotten all that. I have all the proof. Look at this. Look at all I have.
Yeah.
I've forgotten all this. How could this possibly be? It took me about 4 years of that and getting more frustrated and having symptomatically it get worse and worse for me to finally say, and I didn't say it, my wife said it to me, you need to get some help. And I said, I was the president of Sears. What do you mean I need to get some help? But she was right. and when I got help, it was from the VA, and it was in counseling. And as part of the counseling, Sam, not only is there recall and what's called talk therapy, kind of let's see what we can do, get it out, etc. The clinician who was seeing me said, you have quite a story to tell. Who have you told this to? And I said, nobody. And she said, why? And I said, because I'm still embarrassed and shameful, and I don't think anybody's interested, and I don't think anything can come of it. So to make a long story short, she said, well, why don't you start writing some things down? Because your recall is actually pretty good. And I think when you see it on paper, I don't know if your teachers tell you this anymore or not, but a lot of times when you put things down on paper and read it, it looks a lot different than, just thinking it. So I started to do that, and then I realized I have children whom I've never talked to about this. I have grandchildren who I never will talk to about it because they're too young. And I have other family that have been very, very, very loving and yet very careful about never asking me. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does.
And so maybe I don't owe it to them, but maybe there might be some little legacy that they could have to understand why I was so weird when I was alive. And so I wrote it for my family. And as I was going through rewrites, etc., my brother, who is a professional actor and director and writer himself, I said, would you mind just taking a look at this and tell me if it's, worth carrying forward. He read it. He read maybe the 6th draft, and quite emotionally said, "You need to finish this. You need to write it out. People need to hear this." So I did.
So now you're involved in the Vietnam Memorial.
Yes.
But what made you want to visit the memorial for the first time?
I didn't want to. I refused to. It was dedicated in 1982, and the first time I went, I had to because my son was on a White Bluff,
Right.
Washington D.C. trip,
Yeah.
And he said he missed it because he had the flu, and I said, well, that's okay, Jeffy. Well, why don't we go on our own, just make sure we have the same itinerary so you don't miss anything. So we went a couple of weeks later, and they let him do that. And Jeff is very sensitive and very smart, and when we were there at the Smith, he said, they went to the wall, Dad. Can we go to the wall? And I hesitated. And I said, yep, if we have to, we'll go. So we went, and he could tell that he had, not intentionally, but, I was pushed right to the edge. Because I have 5 men on the wall, 5 of my men. And I didn't want to face them. And so when we got there, he was speculating on the symbolism, the design, and everything else. He's also an artist. And then he said, did you know anybody on the wall? I said, yes, unfortunately, Jeff, I did. And he said, do you know where they are? And we said, yes, you're standing right in front of one of them. So I said, thinking, like a good old numbskull Lake Forest dad, go ahead and point to it and I'll take your picture so you can show it to your class. It's like, jeez, what an idiot. But I did. That was the first time, and then I was even more embarrassed. I just wanted to get out of there. And I wanted to make sure he didn't feel terrible about it. So that was the first time. The second time, my wife forced me to go. And that was at some of the low point of my recall after I had retired from Searson. And she, my wife, said, we were going to DC to see one of the kids, and she said, while we're there, I think you ought to go to the wall. And I said, I'm not going to go to the wall. And she said, I think you ought to go talk to your guys. I said, that's a bunch of voodoo stuff, and I don't want to do that. So that was the second time. It was very, very difficult. But the second time is when I was in a different frame of mind, because the docent explained why he was there, and he was identical background to mine, and he said, I think you ought to volunteer here because this is the best I felt in 35 years. Because I had said, how can you possibly do this? This is so tough. And he said, this is the least I can do for the 5 guys that I lost. So that's how it happened.
So the memorial has a lot of symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
What does the memorial symbolize to you?
To me, it is a presentation of the sacrifice of life that most of the people on that wall voluntarily gave their lives. And that's so hard for people to really imagine. How could you possibly die for something? But it's the only place, Sam, now it's becoming more common, like at the Twin Towers in New York, they have the names. But this was the first place, and it is the way it's presented for most, like yourself, young students, visitors, not people of Vietnam era. It's the first time you really are confronted with, oh my God, these people are dead. And they died trying to do something good, they thought. And we keep doing it. It's been going on for 3,000 years, 4,000 years, and we keep doing it. And I always say, you may have heard me say this at the wall, I always say to the visitors, guys your age, it's really easy for us to get 17, 18, 19-year-old kids to fire up and say, yeah, I want to go do that. You better have a damn good reason you're going to send them to lose their lives. You better have a damn good reason. And we don't seem to have that. We seem to say, well, we'll just threaten them with force, and so we'll send the forces out there. But, inevitably that turns to battle. And battle's really bad. And that's goes back to your first question. When you're in battle, you're not thinking about the cause. You're thinking, I hope that other son of a bitch is dying for his country because I'm going to kill his ass. And it's that brutal. Let him die for a cause. I'm not dying for a cause.
The mindset's kind of changed from when you were there and people are there now.
Yes.
They go into the national pride that you clearly didn't have.
Right.
But once they're there, they realize the fear.
Yeah, that's one of the toughest things for the Iraq and Afghanistan kids. It's one of the toughest things is using military terminology. Holy shit. This is for real. There are no timeouts. I can't get a Coke. I can't turn this son of a bitch off. This is for real. You guys are being raised on reality TV. You think that's the real world. It's not the real world. Okay.
So now, what advice would you give to a young man or woman facing being deployed, knowing what you know from your experience in Vietnam? What kind of just thoughts about it?
Pretty much what I said to you before, because the deployment is fraught with, you're trained, you're the best trained warrior in the world coming out of the United States. There's just absolutely no question about that. But the training, and you think it has trained you for almost almost every set of circumstances, but it hasn't. And so what I would say is be vigilant and diligent about doing the best you can in any set of given circumstances every day so you can sleep at night. You don't want to come away from any situation in you will second guess yourself. You will. That is inevitable, and that is part of the combat experience. But the way to soothe that, and the way to be true to yourself when things calm down and you're back home safely, is to be able to say, I did everything I could. Yeah, I made some mistakes. But given what I knew at the time and the circumstances I faced, I did the very best I could. That's all people can ask of you. It's the same thing when you go to Georgetown, when you go into your career, when you go to GW, wherever you're going to go. Give it your all every moment. Don't shortchange anything. So that when you lay on your pillow at night, you go, God damn. If I'd have just done this a little bit harder, I just didn't give it the full thing, or I cheated, or whatever. You know that on the golf course. You got to keep working on the swing. People ask me, I've played golf since I was 7. People say, well, how do you hit the ball like this? It's easy. You just do it a couple 100,000 times and you're all set, right? Right. I mean, what do you want me to tell you? You have to work hard at it. It doesn't come naturally. Look at Michael Jordan, who's a bigger golf nut than Tiger Woods, for God's sakes. He can't do it because he thinks there's a shortcut around. There is no shortcut. You got to hit 1 trillion golf balls. Or, well, most people do. Okay.
All right, so now, can you view the draft dodgers and war protesters as heroes in a way for standing up to the government and law for their beliefs?
Who put you up to that? Heroes, courageous. They were courageous. I married one. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah. My wife led the college campus anti-war rallies. On her campus, she was the head. And she, in the intensity of the times, no, I didn't like people throwing stuff at me and spitting on me in my ROTC uniform and all that. But if you read the book in any kind of depth, you'll see that which is where reluctant patriot comes in, that I wrestled with, do I have the courage to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to do this? And the answer was no, I don't. I don't. And since I don't have the courage and I don't believe in my doubt enough, I do know I have a service obligation to this country. I don't want to go to war. But I come from a family of Italian immigrants that came to the U.S. and got the good life. And somebody has to make a deposit and pay back on that. And so that's why I was a reluctant patriot. Can I say that those who ran and those who became conscientious objectors and those who stood up and protested are heroes? No, I don't think they were heroes, but I do think they were courageous. I think they had the courage of their conviction to say, this is wrong, and I'm not going to be a party to it. And when we think, that is, and Sam, this is probably the most important part of that answer, part of what a service member, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, etc., believes in is the right to disagree. And you will go to battle to allow people to have the right to disagree. So it's important. And it's taken a lot of maturity, a lot of years for me to realize that is part of what I was fighting for. Is so, you know, I used to be on the planning commission board at Lake Bluff, and one night we were talking about, well, how many signs can you put out for a political candidate? Okay, they have to be, you can only put 5 in your front lawn. They have to be this size, and they have to be poked into the grass this way. And I said, wait a minute. If I want to paint the side of my house red, white, and blue and say, vote Republican, you're telling me I can't do that? And they said, well, yeah, I mean, that would look terrible. I said, did you ever hear of the right to express yourself? You know, that's what I fought for. That's what I risked my life for. I did tell them.
So now, well, your wife, but have you ever had any encounters with people who protested or ran from the draft at the wall?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that's in the book also. In the last chapter of the book, I talk about those who, of my age, the boomer generation, and I call it, there's an autonomic, you know what the autonomic nervous system is? You know, you have a conscious nervous system which says, you know, okay, I want to wave my right hand, but the autonomic is what actually keeps your heart pumping. You're not aware of all the things that it's doing to move your muscles and everything else. And so there's an autonomic reaction of everybody of my generation when they go past the wall. And those who ran, generally speaking, those who ran or figured out a way not to go, generally speaking, apologize. And they'll say, are you a veteran? Yes. Did you go to Vietnam? Yes. Yeah, I should have gone. And you know what I say to them? I say, well, lucky you didn't go. I don't say, well, you son of a bitch. I do say, well, lucky you didn't go. Lots of people apologize. I went in the service, but they sent me to Germany. Great, man, that's what I wanted. I didn't want to go to Vietnam. There's a lot of leftover. There's a lot of leftover guilt from this war. Lots.
So the last question, your service in Vietnam obviously changed your life. Can you say it was for the better?
Yes, unequivocally. Which is really a point of the book that it took me a long time to figure that out, Sam. I had to become 60, whatever I was, 64, 63, to realize that the year that I dreaded before I went and the year that I hid for 35 years after I came home was the most important year of my life. It formed me. It tested me in a way that no normal life gets tested. And it wasn't just, it really wasn't just a life-threatening test. It was how to lead, how to talk, how to understand diversity, how to understand how teams work together, how to lead, not manage, how to lead, how to be courageous, how to, all the success I had in my career came out of Vietnam. There's a phrase that they taught us in officer training 45 years ago. It's called OODA. You know, the military has all these acronyms. OODA is O-O-D-A. Remember OODA. Just remember OODA, cadet. OODA means observe, orient, determine, act. That's your job. Observe, orient yourself. Which way do we have to move this thing? Whether this thing is an idea or a piece of equipment or an enemy or whatever. Determine, okay, this is how we're going to do it. Act. And don't be afraid of the outcome. What you're going to see in your life as you matriculate through life, you're going to see people who, you're going to see colleagues and many, many people that want to have more facts. They want to have more data. They want to have more research. They want to have, and in some instances, like in the research business, that's good. In most other situations in life, whether it be family or business or personal or actually spiritual, what you're hoping for when you're insisting on more facts is the facts are going to tell you what the answer is. If they're not, they're going to tell you maybe 80%, and then the other 20 is up to you.